In this video, we're going to take a practical look at an event-driven system using delegates and events. In my scene here, I have a player, I have a UI manager, as well as a game manager. On the game manager, we have a game manager script. On the canvas, I have a UI manager script. And on my player, I have a player script. We have a simple program that basically, when I hit the space key, the player dies, and we increment the death count. So here, I'm hitting the space key, and we're incrementing our death count. If we take a look inside these scripts, you can see here that our player is basically checking for some input and calls a death method. Once it does that, it basically finds the game manager and calls reset player on the game manager. And then basically we find the UI manager and we call the update death count, which has a variable to increment the death count as well as some text on screen. Now, the problem with this design here is that our player has to know about the game manager as well as the UI manager. Any concept of code reusability and modularity has been thrown out because our player has to know about the reset player method in the game manager as well as our UI manager. A better design here would be for the player to be independent, to not have to care about who needs to know that I died. Instead, let's let anyone who's interested in knowing that I died have the ability to subscribe to an event. So what we can do instead here is I'm going to create a delegate that's basically going to take a signature for when I die. So here I'm going to say public delegate void, and we'll say on death. And then here we can create an event for it. So public static event, and we'll call this on death, and we'll say just on death. Okay. Now that we have our delegate declared as well as our event here, and we need to just initialize that. So here we have a delegate of type void with a signature on death, no parameters, and we have an event that matches that. What we can do now is basically create a signature within the other methods that want to subscribe to this on death event. So now, because we have this event-driven system, our player no longer needs to know about the game manager or the UI manager. Instead, if somebody wants to be notified when I die, we can just trigger that event. So inside my death method, I can basically check if anyone cares or is listening. I can say here, if on death is not equal to null, meaning that someone wants to be notified when I die, then what do we want to do? We can raise the event. And here, what we can do now is inside of our game manager program, when we become enabled, I can basically access my player and register to the on-death event. So you'll notice here that our on-death event is type void, function name, no parameters. Well, function void, no parameters. So I can assign reset player to this event. So to do that, I'm going to access that event by accessing my player and then calling the event on it, which is the on-death event. And we want to use the lightning bolt. And here it says player.onDeath is going to equal my reset player method. So whenever our player dies, I want to be notified as the game manager. So I'm going to subscribe to that method. Automatically on player death is going to then call this method here. And you'll see here that says the event player on death can only appear on the left-hand side of a plus equal or minus equal. And that's because we're using an event. So we need to add this method to it. So we're going to say plus equal. You can't directly assign something to an event. You can only add methods to it. So here we have player on death plus equals reset player. And then likewise, let's go back to our UI manager and we're going to do the exact same thing. This signature matches our delegate. So we're going to use onEnable to assign it. So public void onEnable. And this is a method that's automatically called by Unity when the game object is first enabled. And what we're going to do here is we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to call the player on death event, and we're going to say plus equals update death count. So what we're creating here is a very modular system to where basically our player is independent and doesn't rely on these two classes, as well as these two classes are not reliant on the player. They're just basically interested in the player's death. So when the player dies, we subscribe to that method, and for the UI manager, it's going to automatically call update death count. So if we save this, let's hop into Unity here, and you'll see here that we're getting a little error here. It's because I'm using the incorrect one. We want to use the lowercase on death event, not the delegate. And if we save this, we should see here that our program works just fine. with the added flexibility now that our player is independent of itself and can now be tossed into another project without breaking my existing project. So here we go, death count 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so forth. And that's all we had to do.